Explain what you meant about disrupting sort of the international alliances that have existed for a long time and why these seem to be shifting and how.
So, if you think about the way that the United States has operated in our lifetimes, but even before that, right after World War II, there's a real problem because in the 20th century, there had been two world wars. And the First World War, especially, but certainly the second as well, came about because of alliances that had been formed in or around the time of war that made people come to support each other in times of war. And that led to millions of people dying, the devastation of entire societies. And it happened twice in one generation. So after that war, what countries who had fought among the Allies in World War II did was they began to create a world that was tied together by peacetime alliances. Not that we're going to run after each other and help each other just in war, but that we're going to have alliances in peacetime. We're going to find ways to work together through allegiances like the United Nations, which is literally made of the same countries plus four others that were the allies, signed the treaty to be allies together in World War II. We're going to create a place where countries that have issues with each other can come in and can work it out without having to go to war. And fundamental to that is going to be the idea that big countries are not going to take over smaller countries. You're not going to have, another case of an authoritarian like Adolf Hitler just saying, "Well, this country is mine and I'm going to take it over." We're going to get rid of that. Now, those alliances, which included things like the United Nations and NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, have been instrumental in trying to make sure, not in just in trying to make sure, but in making sure that we did not have world wars. Because what NATO really does is it says all of us countries that are part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will come to the rescue of any of the others if anybody is attacked. And of course, the big dog in that fight was the United States. This has been under attack largely, again, by people like Vladimir Putin, who was trying to get away from the idea that he couldn't take over smaller countries. So the invasion first of Georgia and then of um, Ukraine in 2014, and then Ukraine again in 2022 was really a way to say, we don't care about your NATO and we don't care about your rules. We're going to take over Crimea and it's going to be ours. And later on, we're going to take some of these other oblasts in Ukraine. And the big thing about the Biden administration was it tried to reinforce those norms, but also expand them. And as you know, the Biden administration brought two more countries into NATO, but it also brought in the African Union into the G20, for example. It tried to include new voices in that web. I think of it as like a web that holds down the rocks on a hillside so it doesn't slide.
Mm-hmm.
Administration has abandoned that. And now Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth today said that the US is no longer going to be a guarantor of of other countries' security and that Europe is on its own and that it's walking away from that idea that, for example, smaller countries don't have to worry about larger countries because of these international agreements that'll make sure that big countries can't just take over smaller countries. That's a really big deal. That is a really big deal because what that says is that we're going to develop a multipolar world, which is what a number of theorists have called for, in which basically smaller countries have to, sorry, but suck up to bigger countries so that they have some protection. And that's been the world that Vladimir Putin wanted, that Xi Jinping thought that would be good for China, and now apparently that America thinks it's going to live with as well. That is the same kind of world we had before World War II. And the reason that people like me are so concerned about it is because it is a recipe for big conflicts among big powers. And it looks like that's the direction we're going to be going now.
But instead of a conflict with Russia, Donald Trump seems to be sucking up to Vladimir Putin. And today he said he had a lengthy and highly productive call with him that he characterized as the start of the negotiation to end the war in Ukraine. So this whole kind of shift is making for some strange bedfellows, are they not?
Well, you could call it strange bedfellows, or you could say that Vladimir Putin set out in the after 2014 at least, to get rid of NATO, to get rid of these international agreements that kept the world stable, so that he would have access to the places in the world that he wants in order to garner resources, not only places like Ukraine, but also African countries. And what we have seen today, a big day, what we've seen today is the United States saying, okay, if you want those things, you can have them. And we would like to get along with you enough that we're going to let you have whatever you want, presumably with the idea that we, the United States, will start to do the same thing in a different sphere. It's a different approach to foreign policy. It's one that I'm appalled by, but there are theorists, of course, who think it's the wave of the future. They tend to be theorists who are authoritarians.
But doesn't that go against this whole idea of America first and sort of Donald Trump's insistence that we not get involved in any more wars and get involved in international conflicts?
Well, that's the argument, that America first simply pulls us back to our borders, and other countries can do whatever they want. Again, that didn't really work that well in the early 20th century, but I would suggest that first of all, America first is really a vague concept, because it seemed to me that was a way to win election more than it was a series
It
of.
also has some pretty scary historical references too, doesn't it?
It does. America First was really from the 1920s. Again, the idea of America hunkering down so that people like Adolf Hitler could do whatever they wanted in their own countries. And that was, commensurate with the rise of the KKK in America and of the neo-Nazi movement in America, or the Nazi movement, not neo-Nazi at the time. But the piece here that's really important, I think, is the recognition that NATO, especially since it formed in 1947, was crucial to making sure that we would not have these major conflicts. And it looks like we're walking away from that. And in an era in which there's extraordinary competition for resources around the globe, in which there's extraordinary migration because of climate change, that migration is going to bring disease simply by virtue of the way human beings and human populations work. The idea that we can all divide under authoritarian governments, which are not known for treating their people very well, strikes me as being profoundly dangerous. And, we started by talking about the things that have happened in the last week. And I thought the most bizarre thing that I had seen, and the most disturbing thing I had seen, was Musk and his son with Trump in the Oval Office. And by the end of today, I thought, how on earth am I going to be able to talk about that? Because, in fact, this new relationship with Russia strikes me as being even more important than that.
Yeah, let's talk about what Pete Hegseth said about Ukraine today. He called their desire, or the country's desire, to recover all of the territory it's lost to Russia since 2014, in other words, Crimea, right, is an unrealistic objective. So, what message are we sending to Ukraine and to Russia for that matter?
Well, to Russia, we're saying take it. Take this, take anything you want, because we're saying that those international boundaries, the idea that big countries couldn't take over smaller countries, that we don't care about that anymore. Which is extraordinary. I have to say it's extraordinary. But what we're saying to Ukraine is we are no longer going to back you up. Now, just again, this is Ukraine's war. They're going to have trouble fighting it without significant American support. But the Biden administration did make sure that they were funded from the American side through 2025. And Europe has very much stepped up, because they recognize that this is an assault on Europe, not just on Ukraine. So it's not like we get to dictate what the Ukrainians do. This is much more, for me anyway, about the concept of the way the globe is going to work going forward. And in a time when, again, aside from everything you and I are talking about, climate change is a real problem. The idea that we are going to hunker down and say, no, we're not going to be part of any international solutions from now on is really serves a very, very few people. And it doesn't serve, I think, the people of America, let alone the people of the globe.
Let's talk about the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard, if we could. As you know, she was confirmed as Director of National Intelligence today, despite some of her controversial, I guess, friendships or the admiration she has for Vladimir Putin. Um, why is that so significant in your view?
Well, once again, Vladimir Putin, who is the head of Russia, has worked very hard to destabilize democracies, especially to destabilize the United States of America, recognizing that if he could destabilize the United States of America, he could destabilize the support of the Americans for Europe, and he could make sure that he no longer had to grapple with NATO, for example, or with the kinds of world that I just described. And we know, of course, that he interfered in the 2016 election to elect Donald Trump, and that he has continued to interfere in American elections, and that American propaganda is very closely tied, right-wing propaganda is very closely tied to Putin. I do know that according to Julia Davis, who studies Russia and Russian TV right now, they are absolutely rejoicing at both Tulsi Gabbard being at the head of Director of National Intelligence and at the other things we have talked about today coming out of the US government, saying basically their work is done, that they have managed to tear apart American democracy and to guarantee that America will no longer stand behind European democracies. There's something else for the American people, though, that's really important, and that's that when you think about American strength, our strength has always been our people. Our strength has always been in the military side of things, our global side of things, our soft power, which is, the ability to influence people through things like providing food aid and culture, and through our intelligence. American intelligence is the gold standard. And by putting Tulsi Gabbard at the head of as our Director of National Intelligence, especially at a time when other systems of our national intelligence have been compromised, and I don't just mean the secret documents that went down to Mar-a-Lago, but also the fact that the Department of Government Efficiency teams did, in fact, go into the U.S. aid classified computers. We don't know where that information has gone, and that makes us extraordinarily vulnerable in a way that we were not before Donald Trump got involved in national security. It also means going forward that other countries are going to be extraordinarily reluctant to share their intelligence with us. And things like the Five Eyes, which has been in place since World War II, has been extraordinarily important in protecting the United States of America. And we have just thrown that overboard.
What are the Five Eyes?
The Five Eyes are, I always laugh with a friend. We always have trouble getting all five of them. So if I get the wrong ones, I'm sorry to whichever country I leave out. They're the five English-speaking countries, or organizations, the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. I did get them all five, and they share intelligence. So it came out of World War II because they were known as the Five Eyes because there were dispatches that only they could see, and they became known that way. And they are, well, we don't hear about it much in America, but a few years ago, there was a huge bust across Europe of organized crime. And that was a joint organization, a joint effort between the Australians and the United States. And if you remember, one of the ways that it broke open that the Russians were working for Donald Trump in 2016 was that somebody had boasted to an Australian ambassador. And a lot of people thought, why are the Australian ambassadors worried about America? Because of Five Eyes. Now, Five Eyes is just not going to care anymore. Not that they're not going to care, but they're going to be much more reluctant to share stuff with us.
What are some of the other ramifications of her confirmation in your view?
Well, that's a big one. I mean, what we're seeing is the sharing, I think, or the compromising of our national intelligence, which I say is our gold star around the world. And what that means is that people are going to be less willing to work with us. And by people, I don't just mean other countries, I mean operatives who no longer know that they're safe. I mean, if you think about what they may or may not have seen at USAID, we don't know what's in those files. And if you are somebody who's working in a country against someone or for someone, you need that to be kept secret. And now it's not. I mean, if it were you, would you be willing to say, "Oh yeah, I'll work against Vladimir Putin, for example, for the Americans in a country in Africa?" The answer is no, because you have no idea that you're going to stay secure.
This is not so much because of Tulsi Gabbard, but it's because of compromised intelligence, primarily by Elon Musk and his merry band of dogers, if you will.
In that case, yes, but the concern about Tulsi Gabbard was the company that she was keeping. She has spoken in language that reflects that of Vladimir Putin's propaganda. And she was close to the head of Syria, who was, of course, propped up by Russia and took refuge in Russia after his people threw him out.